Hey guys, it's Dr. Karina Menardi here to bring you all things STEM. From my journey to yours, we are on an adventure together. Today, we have the immense pleasure of being joined by Dr. Ali Divan. Let's all give a round of virtual applause to Dr. Divan. How are you, Dr. Divan?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, we are so excited to have you, and I'm really um, ecstatic to have this conversation. It's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of truth telling, if I may say so. So Dr. Divan is the founder of Trulitica, a professional career services company that focuses on strategy, communication, and career development for scientists in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Divan has experience in reagents manufacturing and development, as well as diagnostics. He has served the San Diego biotech industry in quality control, product development, technology transfer, operations, and R&D. Among his most notable contributions, he supported the launch and operational scaling of BioLegend's Total Seq product line during the COVID-19 pandemic. He holds a Ph.D. in medical sciences from Texas A&M University and completed his postdoctoral studies in microbiology and medicinal chemistry at the University of North Dakota. So again, welcome. And as we ask all of our guests, you are much more than your bio. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I started out as a person who was interested in business, became a scientist through some life circumstances, and then came around full circle back to entrepreneurship. So, as you mentioned, I have my own company now here in San Diego, but it serves a global footprint. And the purpose of my company is really to remove barriers. So, one of the big challenges that scientists have once they, whether they're getting their bachelor's degree, their master's degree, their PhD, it's very difficult, especially for the last two, for master's degree and PhD, for them to begin their industrial careers, whether that's in biotechnology or pharma or even in some adjacent spaces. Now tech is starting to get into biology as well. And it's very difficult for them to get their foot in the door there. And one of the reasons is that there's no training that enables them to come up with a strategy. There's no training that enables them to communicate effectively. In fact, the training that they receive during their studies kind of teaches them to communicate ineffectively. We we tend to validate people who talk for a very long time, and we tend to write articles that are unnecessarily long because more is considered better. But in the business world, that's not true. Less is more. And so I started this company because I experienced this challenge myself when I was leaving academia to join the industrial world. And there's so many other people who have this problem too. Fortunately, I was able to learn the right way to do everything just from experience and from having done it wrong for so long. And now I'm imparting that onto others. And so the way that I ended up in the coaching space was that, I'll take this long story and make it short. Once I started building my biotech career, I had direct reports and I had people that I worked with and mentored on my own. And of course, I was the recipient of excellent mentoring as well from my managers. And so there was there was this big need that I identified for this type of mentorship to happen before you get into the industrial world. And the other side of it is that I was fortunate that I had great mentors. That's not always the case. A lot of people don't. A lot, especially in a startup setting where they're running really lean, you're expected to come in and just go, and they may not have mature systems in place. So there's an element of mentorship that's required upstream of this. And I really enjoyed those one-on-one relationships that I had with my employees and with my mentors. And I wanted to take that and create a business of it and say, look, let's do these one-on-one relationships that empower you to build a better career and better life for yourself. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, we need that.
I love that in so many ways. I can the reason that I was laughing, I think, at what you were saying around training was, at least for my group, we were trained to be competitive and attack the science. And that's not exactly how you should be within a corporate environment, in which case you're all in the same ship going in the same direction to the same end goal. And so when you talk about communications, both verbal and nonverbal, that's key. Collaboration, having colleagues, all of that different stuff. And the other piece that you didn't say, but you were kind of going down the route of ROI and like return on investment of your science, right? Where that is such a business term. But when you think about it on science, it's not really a point of outcomes based driven, right? Um, I don't know. Could you comment on that at all?
Yeah. Well, so glad you brought that up. So one of the mindset changes that I often work with my clients on is changing what they consider to be a result. They they perceive, because of the training in academia, there are only a few possible results. One result is you published a paper. One result is you got grant funding. Another result is you got tenure or something. None of those things are results. Those are things that results contribute to getting, but your results are the methods that you developed. They're the impact of the science. They're the applications of the science. If you don't have that, you don't have a result. And so when you translate this to the business world, suppose you're working on your resume, very few organizations, there are exceptions, but very few organizations are going to read your resume and go, oh, wow, they studied this protein I never heard of. And then they publish in this journal I never heard of. I better look that up and read everything about it to see why it's important. I know that sounds silly, but in my head, when I was doing my PhD, I thought, oh, yeah, people are going to read that I studied this particular bacteria and discovered that you can do a mouse model and that it can, infect the meninges. They're going to think I'm such a genius. They're going to be like, we got to work with this guy. Nobody cares. They're not going to look it up. They're not going to read it. And the problems that they need solved are not those types of problems. And so fundamentally, you have to change the way that you communicate to be a little bit more the way that a marketer thinks. You have to communicate in the way that lets people know what are they going to get, and what they're going to get has to be, the way you communicate that has to be pertinent to their pain points. It has to be pertinent to the problems that they have. It can't just be features that you have, because if nobody needs those features, it falls on deaf ears. And so, yes, a lot of the work that I do with students and postdocs and even PIs sometimes is, tell me what you think a result is. Tell me what you think. You have this bullet point here on your resume. What do you think someone is going to think and feel when they read that? And then when they say it out loud, we kind of realize, like, oh, well, did they say that they needed that on the job description? Oh, they didn't. Well, let's talk about the things that they needed on the job description. And that becomes this big aha moment for them, because they have it. They have those experiences. They just haven't communicated or thought about it in that way.
No, I think that's spot on. I also thoroughly appreciate you mentioning mentorship, and it's interesting. I'm going to have another guest talk explicitly about mentorship, but there's the bidirectionality of mentorship, right? Of you not only getting mentorship from others, and it doesn't need to be necessarily someone who is older than you. It could be someone who is, in fact, younger than you, but in a different area. But also imparting mentorship and having mentees. And so I was hoping that you could comment a little bit more about that.
I think the age part is something that I kind of struggle with a little bit, because some of my clients are older than me. And sometimes I question myself. I'm like, do I really have anything of value to give them? How could they not know what I know? But they don't. And so I think what you find out is that as you go and have experiences and learn things, you take those things for granted. You start thinking that they're obvious, and then you go meet with somebody else who has the same perception of themselves, and they tell you something, and you go, "Oh, I didn't know that," and they're surprised. Well, doesn't everybody know that? And so what you find is that really it's a collection of experiences that put you, maybe you and a friend of yours graduated college with the exact same degree at the exact same time. You both knew exactly the same things. 5 years later, you've gone down very different paths. Believe it or not, 5 years later, you can both mentor each other. It's not like it's not just one thing. And really, mentorship, I think it's a type of teaching. It's a type of coaching. It's a type of learning and growing together. And one thing that I think is really important when you are mentoring is to be able to take your own ego out of the equation. I used to think that I could not mentor somebody unless I knew everything they didn't know. Like I had to know everything and they right? And they had to just be naive. But that's that you can't do that as a professional. You can't. And so it's really important to be able to say, "Oh, actually, I'm not really sure about that, but that's your expertise. Tell me about that." And then you can just kind of echo back to them, "Well, it sounds like this is what you're saying. Is that true?" And it's actually helpful to them because now they've had the opportunity to explain something they understand well to someone who doesn't understand it and have it reframed and rephrased in a way that is accessible to a otherwise foreign audience. So it helps both parties.
Your statement around ego is spot on. I think my greatest mentor was someone who shared his humility around not knowing something. And it's one form to communicate that. It's another form to just say, "I don't know that. Please tell me more because I didn't that is not where my mind was. That is not what I was thinking." And so his approach to that was really what I gleaned from it and I use throughout today because there's a bit of compassion to that. Where it's like, "No, I totally am not going to be the smartest person in the room. Please tell me. Tell me what I need to learn and what I need to know." Um,
Yeah, I think that's actually in terms of what I've experienced and what I've read in terms of case studies, being the smartest person in the room actually hinders a mentorship type relationship because then you're kind of the authority. You're not really there to help people learn and grow. And then that's when people start worrying about stupid questions.
and there's no question that is stupid. I mean, in my opinion, um,
I
because
agree.
you can argue about pretty much everything in this world, and never be right or wrong. Um, we had a conversation right before this about what it means to be a scientist. And so I'm curious from your perspective, historically, pre-PhD, during the PhD, now fast forward to now, has that definition changed and how so?
Yeah, it has changed. So I used to think that to be a scientist, you had to have a PhD because that's the model. That's the academic model. And you, I think within academia, if you call yourself a scientist and you don't have a PhD, you'll get like an eye roll, or they'll kind of treat you like you're not a real scientist. And I don't know why that is. I think it's a little bit more hierarchical. Maybe it's a little bit more old fashioned. Maybe because it's an ultra competitive environment, it feels like a zero sum game. And so the more people who say that they have a particular identity when they haven't gone through the same hoops, the more of a threat they're perceived. Maybe that's it. But out in the out in the business world, I learned pretty quickly that really a scientist, if you're talking about, let's just focus on life sciences because that's what I know. A scientist is somebody who can design an experiment, solve a problem independently, defend it, and be able to explain exactly why. That's what a scientist is. And so you don't notice how I didn't mention a degree. It's got nothing to do with your degree. And I've worked with scientists who are excellent scientists, who are better than me at science, who have bachelor's degrees. They also have 25 years of experience in the industry. And so, when you think about experience, if you look at job descriptions, it's not unusual to see a job description that has a requirement with PhD with 0 to 2 years of experience, master's with 3 to 5, bachelor's with 8 plus. There's a reason for that. It's because your experience determines your ability to solve those types of big problems. And your experience in academia is one form of experience, but so is your applied experience in industry. And it really makes me question whether a higher degree is even necessary. And if we had robust training programs within uh, the life science space, I know many pharmaceutical companies that are well established do. That could actually be a better training environment because you're forced to study something relevant that produces results that the world needs. There's an economic need for it. If you're in academia, there may not be. And I've talked to a non-trivial number of people where I've said to them, um, the types of things that I teach are soft skills. I don't teach hard skills. You need to come in with those. I know you have hard skills, but the hard skills that you have are not in demand and you're geographically restricted. I can't invent those jobs for you where you live. So I don't think this will be a good fit. And I think that's the biggest thing that's missing in our training programs in the academic setting is that you're training people to solve problems you care about. If the rest of the world doesn't care, now they don't have a job and they can't go become experts in what you care about because then they're competing with you. So what are they supposed to do? They're just cheap labor. And so it ends up being a big problem.
You hit on a topic that is near and dear to my heart with respect to experience. Um, and it's interesting for me to reflect back on my various experiences. And I can say that the laboratory was where I, really became a subject matter expert in what I was studying at that point in time. But it was the opportunity as well to network with a variety of other people on campus and be an active participant on campus. Um, that also taught me how to communicate with others and the experience around how to run a portfolio of projects that are extracurricular. And I got so much flack from not only my PI, but my the other professors about not devoting all of my time to the science organization. And I reflect now on I learned so much more outside of the lab than I did in the lab because exactly that. I was focusing on someone else's pet project, which has still gone nowhere. That I'd never use any of the theoretical instances on anything that I do right now, but it's that sense of curiosity and how to actually approach an experimentation. That's what I use on a daily basis and the problem solving skills. But when it comes to the collaboration, that's something that I leveraged external resources for. Um, and I took, it was because of resilience that I took that. And I'm grateful now that I was a stick in the mud back then and I did that. But a lot of graduate students don't have that opportunity.
I agree. And first of all, I guess my question for you is how much of the extracurricular things that you did do you think contributed to your success now?
I would say about 50-50, mainly
Okay.
because that's how I networked. And so that's how I got
Yeah.
my first job.
Okay, so that's a lot. That might
Mhm.
be 99%. Okay, if you compare yourself, it might have been people competing with you who had the same skills, but they didn't go network. So I do think that so this is kind of moving us towards another topic that I wanted to kind of address, and that is sort of wondering, what exactly is the value of higher education? And this isn't to say that you shouldn't do it because I think it does have value. But I think that there's a disproportionate focus among universities, PIs, and frankly a lot of parents that if you get good grades in school, that means you will be good at life. And I don't think there's any relationship between those things. They're unrelated because living life is a very unstructured, probabilistic model that has multiple variables. School is structured, and there are very few variables. And if you just apply yourself, you can do well. I think the more important thing, the reason that I care if my kids get good grades isn't the grade. It isn't even the subject. It's showing up and not knowing something and having the discipline to walk away knowing how to do something. But that doesn't have to be a book. That can be like building a birdhouse. That can be that can be doing anything. That can be riding a bike. You all you need to do to be able to be considered an expert on something or to have experience is to walk in ignorant and to walk out knowing something. That's it. And I think that if we can shift the way that we think about things, both within academia and as parents and culturally to see that, I think that it'll create like more of an innovative spirit among people that are graduating, whether from high school or college, because there's this deep connection for people who have done well in school. There's this deep need, I think, for structure, and they walk into all of these businesses and all these different life experiences realizing there's no path. There's no set path. Nobody knows. Like I had the audacity to ask somebody if there was is there like a certain like program you can do to become a CEO? Like that's what I thought. I thought you just like go to CEO school or something. And it's like no, it doesn't work that way. That's not how people end up like that. So I think going back to the story that you told about you getting flack for doing all these outside things is because they were perceived as irrelevant when in reality they were incredibly relevant and probably helped you more than others who did not do that and instead focused all of their effort on one thing that was a little bit more academic.
I love that on so many levels, and I want to reiterate it plus one. Um, there is a huge um, correlation right now on outcomes based off of memorization of topics. Um, and while I struggled with this professor, and I use anecdotal references throughout. He was a professor of biochemistry in my undergraduate, and he didn't like me. I didn't like him. It was obvious. Whatever. Water under the bridge at this point. And his tests were focused on what ifs. So I reflect fondly on memorizing the Krebs cycle as an example, and you can understand quite well, I'm
Mm.
sure. Um, and it was, okay, how much ATP, how much, where did dehydrogenation happen? Where did dehydroxylation happen? Yada, 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 right? But his tests were, but what if you had a genetic component which then switches citric acid and switches its hydroxylic group? What happens to the Krebs cycle? What is the downward spiral that happens? So it's all about the what ifs. And what still is to me today resonant is that he was not emphasizing the memorization of mastering the material, but mastering it in a way that when you are set with a problem, you are then given the tools to solve that problem, which goes back to curiosity. It goes back to problem solving. It goes back to how do you design an experiment in order to solve said experiment to answer the question. And that's something that I don't think educational pathways right now are really leveraging. It's here's what you need to memorize, go memorize it, next. And so it's very competency and proficiency based.
Yeah, I'll take it a step further and say that that's actually the problem. I'll get a lot of flack for saying this, but that's the problem with healthcare today. Like a lot of healthcare providers are practicing what some of the more senior doctors call cookie cutter medicine, where they're basically just human algorithms where they kind of take you down like a logic map and say, oh, then it must be this, it must be this, it must be this. And they don't realize they're not really thinking about it critically. They're not really doing problem solving. Whereas some of the older generation of doctors have been in the field long enough and have made enough mistakes to realize, oh, you know what? This is more of an art where we don't need this whole memorization thing is actually not that helpful. And I feel the same way. Like anytime my kids come home with memorization tasks, I'm like, to what end? If it's important, you'll memorize it. If it's not, you don't need it. And that's been my position for a very long time. I thankfully I didn't ever have to memorize anything in my graduate program. I did in undergrad, but in my graduate program, everything was open book. You know, you have a problem, you have one day to solve it. Go figure it out.
Yeah, I don't remember if I had to memorize anything, but I really kind of blocked out graduate school, frankly.
I think a lot of people do. Yeah, a lot of people do. This is tough times. No money, a lot of stress.
Yeah, for nothing. Or for very little, I should say, not
Yeah,
for nothing. But
it can feel like it's for
no.
nothing, especially when you get to the end of the road and you feel so proud and so accomplished, and you expect that people will be knocking on your door to offer you a job, and then you realize you're in this market that nobody cares what you did. At least not if you don't
No.
communicate it right.
I think the hardest thing for me too, was entering into healthcare right after my PhD and seeing that medical doctors would be referred to as doctor, but I just got my PhD and no one would call me doctor.
Yeah.
They didn't think that I was a real doctor, and that was eye-opening for me. It was anticlimactic, but it was eye-opening, and it's like, okay." It was a little bit of an ego blast, but, whatever. Take it,
You know where I think
you
it
know?
comes from?
But
It goes right back to this idea of what do I get from you? They call doctors doctor because they solve their problems. They don't call us doctor because they don't have a problem where I need to tell them one very specific thing about a B cell, because that's not a problem the whole world has.
but it was so funny because one of the medical leaders, he said, "Oh, you just got your PhD?" I said, "Yeah." And he was asking me about it in my dissertation. He was like, "You PhDs are always smarter than us, and we just don't like that." And I I was like, "Okay, it's true."
I think it's just a
Um,
different type of intelligence, because they are
yeah, oh
very,
yeah.
very like I've, there are medical students that I used to mentor when I was a postdoc, and they'd spend like 12 hours a day memorizing stuff. And I was like, if I had to, I don't even know if I could. That's a whole different game.
Yeah, I would not be able to. Hard stop. Um, so let's change it up a little bit, and I want you to talk a little bit about Trulitica and what you're doing. What are your foci, I guess technically?
Yeah.
What are
Yeah.
your goals?
So it's been a year that the company has been in business. It was 1 year last week, and in that time, had 18 clients get hired, which is amazing. Um, and I think if you talk to recruiters, they would consider those astronomical numbers for one person to achieve. But the reason I'm able to achieve it is because I'm not trying to fill a role. I'm not focusing on here's a job opening, I got to find the right person. I say here's a person, I got to find the right job. And it's just a completely different model. If you think about how real estate works, you have your buyer's agent and your seller's agent. That's not the case in hiring. It's just an agent for the business. And so essentially at this point, I'm both a mentor, coach, trainer, and agent for them to help them empower them to find their own correct careers, but also introduce them to people and teach them how to network and communicate. So often they'll be having these DM conversations with people, and the way that they communicate in writing is so different than anybody would speak. And so I just tell them, I tell them, read what you want to write out loud to me. And then they read it out loud. And I ask, is that how you speak? They say, no. I say, well, how would you speak? Tell me with your words right now what you want to say to them. And then we just say that. It's very simple, but it humanizes you. And I think there's like an unnecessary level of formality there. But going back to Trulitica. So primary focus right now is folks with master's degrees and PhDs who are in the R&D space. So by R&D, I mean wet lab and computational biology, bioinformatics, things of that nature. I have also had individuals who were previously in an R&D role, and now that they have that experience are ready to go into more project management type facing roles, more people facing roles. And I think it's helpful to do that because you understand every stakeholder. If you haven't lived the life of somebody living in the lab, which is a very stressful and difficult job to have, especially if you have a family, because there's so much unpredictability. You have to stay late sometimes. Sometimes you got to come in on weekends. Work life balance is hard. And so I think having experienced that, you can come in with some level of empathy as a project manager and really help people push back when it's necessary, but also understand when someone's saying something where you're like, well, I don't really, that doesn't really check out. I've been in the lab, that I don't really understand why that would take that long. Help me understand. So I've helped people transition in those types of roles. And then I also have people who have taken sort of non-traditional paths. So one individual who got their PhD in neuroscience and then went and worked in the life science space and then went into real estate in a marketing type role, but is pivoting back into life sciences. And so, and I think there's some difficulty in terms of how do you talk about that? How do you explain your why? But there are ways to do it. So that's where it's been the last year. I do think I can't say too much about it, but I am working on some partnerships with some other individuals and other companies where I think we can expand this a little bit more because one of the big pain points for scientists coming out of academia, some of them say, "Well, I'm a people person. I want to get into sales," you know? And some of them would be fantastic at sales, but if you look at the job description for sales, it's it's hard. It's hard to position yourself without having sales experience as someone in your late 20s, early 30s and a PhD. It's hard to position yourself against somebody who's the same age and has been doing it for 8 years and doesn't have a PhD because they might actually be a better candidate, you know? So, working a little bit on building systems and training programs to help them get those experiences and talk the talk and come up with territory plans and things of that nature, but also how to get into entrepreneurship as well, because there are people who would be very good at entrepreneurship, but they're prevented from doing that because they didn't discover some super important tech that went to the right tech transfer office and the right VC saw it and they went to the right incubator. So much of that is pedigree based and who you know. But when it comes down to skills, some of these people would be excellent candidates for that. So I'm working on programs to remove barriers, and I'm not doing that alone. I'm doing that with another group, but working on programs to remove barriers of that nature, so that ultimately it's a matchmaking problem. We have huge problems on one side, huge solutions on the other, but we can't match them up because of all these barriers to entry. And so all I'm trying to do is create that sort of connector type economy and the removal of these very solvable problems that are preventing this from happening. And ultimately, what's the outcome? The outcome is these people who would be unfulfilled and uncompetitive in academia just because of the sheer market saturation, they would end up taking adjunct faculty roles. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for them, I think they'd be very resentful because they would have so much more they wanted to do and to offer. Or they'll end up in these sort of forever postdoc positions. And what does that mean for you? That means that you're never owning a home. You're always worried about bills, and you bring that home with you. It doesn't matter how zen you are, you're going to bring that home with you, and you're going to look in the mirror and you're going to feel like a failure because you're going to say, "I did so much, I know so much, I can do so much, but nobody cares." Look at the flip side of it. Now you've gone into a role where the result of your work isn't just a paper. The result of your work is a product. And somebody else takes that and puts it through clinical trials. And then one day it might make it into the clinic. One day there might be a person who is terminally ill and gets something that you contributed to. And then lives longer or doesn't die. That's a way better impact. And you're rewarded for it. You're rewarded for it. You get paid way more. And you can buy a house and you can save up to put your kids through college. And I know that people will push back and say, well, science isn't about the money. That's a very privileged thing to say. When you can't afford rent, I'm sorry, it is about the money. If you can't meet your basic needs, it's always about the money. And so I just dismiss those arguments right away as, well, this person doesn't understand what these people are going through. This person went through science when the economy was different and the opportunities were different, because the opportunities haven't changed, but the number of people who are fighting for those opportunities in academia has. And that's why we get all these additional requirements, is they're trying to kind of weed things out. But I think ultimately, by removing these barriers, will improve the quality of life for the individuals that are coming into this sphere, will increase the amount of IP we have in the United States. It will improve GDP and national security. And then on top of that, it's a win for patients. So there's nothing to lose here. And it astounds me that nobody's really effectively done anything about it yet. So what I've done in the last year at Trulitica is a very small part of what I intend to do moving forward in the future.
And congratulations on the 1-year anniversary. I missed that
Thank
update
you.
on LinkedIn. I do pay attention to your LinkedIn quite often.
It's okay
Um,
if you don't.
um, so I have a follow-up question because I admire what you are building. And given your clientele and your customers, I'm curious as to, what is the sweet spot for introducing alternative career paths to individuals? And I ask that because it's um not only does life evolve, people evolve, and people and as well as technology and science evolves. And so, I mean, I'm never shutting the door on going back to the laboratory. Very, very unlikely, but if there's a time, maybe. And so I'm curious about what your stance is, sort of, or maybe not a stance, but your opinion on, how do you intersect, pre-grad school, grad school, post-grad school on career pathing?
I think it's on a continuum because, as you said, people have the right to change their minds. I changed my mind after my second postdoc. And it was after like my 16th grant rejection that I was like, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. And I decided to make a pivot and go into the industrial space. And if I were restricted to making that decision when I was in graduate school, I would have said, no, I'm fine. I'm going to go into academia. And so you have to be able to be dynamic and respond to the market and respond to whatever circumstances you're experiencing. You can't predict the future. So I think this is why it's really important to expose people to these career paths as early as you can. Because I also didn't think I was even going to be a scientist. I thought I was going to be a businessman, and I ended up in business, but took this uh, 15-year path in science. And you just never know. So I think that giving people the opportunities to just gain awareness and exposure, I think that's the important part, without trying to influence them to go through one path or another, but just say, here's what this is like. Here's what this is like. Here's what this is like, until they, even if they haven't made their minds up, they might have some experience in life that becomes an inflection point for them. And they'll go back to that memory and say, hey, actually, I kind of like that 5 years ago. I was kind of curious about it. Now I'm more curious. Maybe I'll reach back out to that person. I think the other side of it is full acknowledgement and transparency of the reality of the situation by universities. Universities are not being transparent enough in disclosing the reality of the situation. If you're going to go do a major that, and this is outside of science even, if you're going to go do a major that doesn't have great job prospects, they need to tell you that. And they need to also have some statistics on where did their alumni go who majored in this. What's their median salary right now? And you need to make your decision based on that. Because if I'm really passionate about something, but the majority of people 3 years out of graduating from my program are making a median salary beyond livable wages, um, it's going to be hard for me to justify following that path plus all the college debt. So I think that there's a level of, I think, fiduciary responsibility that universities are not exercising towards their most important stakeholders.
Well, it's the ROI, or to return back to the ROI conversation, the ROI of your degree.
Yeah.
What is that a return on investment? Because you are investing within yourself. I think there's also a huge uptick in individuals achieving AA degrees in high school. And so their college costs decreases because they're only taking upper divisions. But then you don't have all of the other resources that surround you and or the experiences that surround you. So then you're almost I don't you're at a loss, I think, for your career coming out of undergrad in your bachelor's degree personally. And so there's also the sort of, okay, well, there was an ROI, but then I don't know.
Well, I guess the question is, to what end are these people pursuing degrees? To what end are they being admitted into colleges? Because I think that the university model is interesting because the instant you ask them for money, they say, "Oh, we're not a business." But the instant you owe them money, they are a business. So it's a little bit odd in that regard. It's a weird kind of like middle gray area that depending on the argument, they'll play both sides. But my my observation is that you've sort of ended up with degree inflation. 25 years ago, a bachelor's degree was a big deal. Now it's just like it's a requirement to get even the most basic job, and I don't really get it. Why do these people have to end up in so much debt to get the same job that they didn't need this degree for 25 years ago? What's changed? And the answer is I don't think anything has changed. I'm not really I don't really get why these requirements exist.
But there's also a dichotomy that I've found because bachelor's meant something, master's meant something, PhD meant something. But then you reach a point at which PhD, you're quasi qualified for a lot of jobs degree wise, but underqualified experientially wise. And so then what is the sweet spot?
I don't know. I wish I had an answer because, like, this is a real problem. It's less of a problem in life sciences because a PhD is a requirement for many scientist roles, but I know that in other spaces like tech, for example, it's very difficult if you have a PhD in like psychology or something like that. It's very difficult to position yourself against somebody who's been doing whatever scope of work you intend to do with all your statistics training and things like that, who's been in the workforce for a long time. So and again, at that time, you do have to address the criticism of being overqualified because the perception, the person interviewing you may have no idea what a PhD actually knows. So they may have this perception that you know everything about everything and that you should go work at NASA when in reality, you know a lot about a few things, you know. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question.
You know a lot about a little.
Yeah,
I
you
think
do.
that's
You
that's
do.
essentially
That's
what a
what you know.
PhD is.
Like, I knew of a lot about a mouse and a bacteria in a very specific context. That's what I knew.
Yep.
But also all the other like, that's what I thought was important, but everything else that I knew was the more important thing. It was the method development, the technical skills, all of that stuff.
Well, Dr. Divan, this has been such a great conversation. We've kind of traveled the world of knowledge base, if you will, and opined on a variety of different topics, which I'm just so excited about. Um, and I am just so pleased and thankful for you joining me today. And I'm so looking forward to the next 10 years, 20 years of Trulitica and seeing where the partnerships go.
Thanks so much. Me too.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Devon. And we'll see everyone later. Bye. At STEM From, we are working towards making all STEM careers achievable regardless of your identity, background, or even access to resources. Here at STEM From, we will introduce you to all things STEM, whether they be careers, research, tips and tricks, and even inspiration. Thanks all for watching and learning with us today. Don't forget to ask yourselves, where do you want your journey to stem from? Bye, guys.